who read to us the provisions of Standing Order 96-5. I wish you would remind your counterpart in the National Assembly that they also have an equivalent standing order in 87-5, that they are not supposed to do what they did this morning, but they did it anyway. And as a Liberal Speaker, I think we should allow us to pay them back by the same coin. Mr. Speaker, I have a feeling that the National Assembly is suffering from what is commonly called the Embaraniro syndrome. Mr. Speaker, persons who suffer from the Embaraniro syndrome will start calling names to innocent intended victims and then turn on them to harm them. In Nikolai Gogol's book called The Government Inspector, Mr. Speaker, an erratic mayor tells his askaris, arrest that man and lock him up for theft. The askaris say, but he hasn't stolen, sir. Then the mayor says, just arrest him, he'll steal one day anyway. That is what the National Assembly is doing to this House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must stand up to be counted. The Constitution is so clear, Mr. Speaker. Like those who have spoken before me have said, all bills passed are acts of Parliament. If you look at Article 102, it describes the term of Parliament, not the term of Senate and term of National Assembly, the term of Parliament. If you look, Mr. Speaker, at the petitions that Wananchi bring to these houses, one would expect that more petitions would be going to the National Assembly. But the number of petitions Wananchi bring to this House, Mr. Speaker, are more than 5 times more than the petitions that go to the National Assembly. Because, Mr. Speaker, Wananchi out there believe that this is the house of reason and this is the house of justice. And I agree with those who have spoken before me, Mr. Speaker, that we should not descend to that level. We must stand by the law, we must stand by the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the statement made by the chairman of the Finance Committee, the distinguished Senator for Mandera, represents our views in the committee. I'm a member of that committee. We discussed it, we agreed, and it's regrettable, Mr. Speaker, that somebody has caused the president to assent to the appropriation bill that has been passed unconstitutionally. Without DORA, Mr. Speaker, no other legislative process on financing and management of budget can follow. It is very clear. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly has gone ahead, passed the bill, and I don't know what the advisors have done. They should have told the president that let this impasse between the two houses be sorted out first. Mr. Speaker, now is the constitutional moment for this country. And members of this House, regardless of where we come from or our political affiliation, looking at comparable jurisdictions, Australia, Canada, India, UK, name it, the Senate is always the upper house, the house of revision, the house that is an appellate structure for the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I've been seeing bills coming from the National Assembly, and sometimes you wonder whether there is much thinking put in it. You remember in the last Parliament, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly even mischievously passed a law that intended and purported to exclude this House from making any approval of treaties. Yet the Constitution says all treaties signed by the government must be approved by Parliament. We had to come here to change the law to protect the interests of this House. So what we must do, Mr. Speaker, as a House, because every success must come with sacrifices. Every success must come with some pain. members of this House, Mr. Speaker, led by yourselves, must stand up and be counted. In the last parliament, Ekwe Ethuru as our speaker.
You are distinguished.
Nephew is the distinguished senator for Nairobi. He was engaged in a rowdy manner.
I thought you had brought relatives here.
So, Mr. Speaker, now that we are in a constitutional moment, and the chairman of the BBI are from this House, the joint chairman, Senator Wako, Senator Yusuf Haji, this House, Mr. Speaker, must aggressively pursue a constitutional change where we restore the position of the Senate as to what Senates are worldwide. Mr. Speaker, we have agreed that we are going to court. We already are emboldened by the advisory of the Supreme Court, which we all went to court, including yourself, Mr. Speaker. And the Supreme Court said it's unimaginable to think of any legislation that does not touch on counties. Whether you are talking of security, the theater of security is in the county. Whether you are talking of education, schools are found in the county. Whether you are talking of any matter under Schedule 4, Mr. Speaker, they are all in the counties. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the leadership of this country, both the executive and the legislature, not to precipitate an unnecessary political crisis in the country. Because, Mr. Speaker, there are Kenyans out there who will go to court. Probably Omtata is already in court, challenging the constitutionality and legality of the appropriation bill that has now been ascended to. And a good court addressing its mind properly to the law and to the Constitution will annul that act. We don't want this country to have this kind of legal ping pong. Every time we move forward, we have to move backwards. Therefore, senators, next week is the week for the Senate. Next week is the day when you must remember a movie called The Verdict. A movie called The Verdict, where, Mr. Speaker, the lawyer says there is no other case. This is the case. There is no other case. This is the case, Mr. Speaker, and we must do so. Thank you.